I'm with Daniel and Gbujie of the environmentalist organization Team 54, here to talk a bit about what he does and what he thinks we should be doing with regards to climate change and how it's affecting other parts of the world like Africa. All right, so why don't we start there? You're from Nigeria. Why don't you tell us a bit about how climate change is viewed in Nigeria?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Ed Strike. It's always a wonderful opportunity, to speak out. It's part of the process that has been advocated for us to begin the healing process of repairing Earth. So, speaking up and addressing issues, identifying problems, and then relating with those problems that have been identified, and then helping people that are disproportionately vulnerable to this problem to rise, and then taking appropriate response are the forward-looking steps that we need to take in addressing climate change. So just like you rightfully said, I'm from Nigeria. I'm from a minority tribe called the Igbos. So we're in the southeastern part of Nigeria. Nigeria is in West Africa for our audiences that don't know the geography of everything well. And climate change impact has been monumental in my country. Um, it's so because the entire Africa continent itself, from the IPCC report, are at most risk of climate change impacts. And that's because of two things majorly that I have researched around. But one of them is because of the absence of the capacity for Africans themselves and their leaders that have sweeping impact on their lives, to understand the import of climate change and to begin the process of either adapting or mitigating. Another reason why it's worse off is the climate change process itself is it's a bit complicated. It has so many tentacles. It has so many areas that are critical areas that Africans collectively engage in. For instance, Africans engage in agriculture. Africans engage in health related things. Africans engage in socio-economic trading, either within the country or outside the natural boundary system. Now, this is where the unfortunate thing is that climate change triggers, worsens, you understand, and takes away life from all these critical components. Climate change even makes it worse because these critical components have interrelated sectors. For instance, if the agricultural products are less, it means malnourishment, which is a health problem, will become a challenge. So in Nigeria, climate change has made our lives worse. It has worsened, the increase in temperature has worsened crop yield. Agricultural produce are much lower. It's so low to the point that the government spends bulk of its budget shipping in things that originally can be produced on land. And you do know that when we source for our food organically from the location where we are actually reducing carbon footprints than when you bring them from outside. Just the fact of transportation or bringing them through seas and through oceans in quantum to feed a population that is expanding is in itself a crisis. So the impact of climate change in Nigeria has been very devastating for us. It has been devastating because it has caused security problems. You do know in my country, Nigeria, we have the northern and the southern part of the country. The northern
Yeah.
part of the country are predominantly herdsmen. By herdsmen, they are people that do cattle grazing, but on the open field. It's not like a farmhouse. It's not like in a place. So everywhere is the place where their cattle can feed off. And the last 45 years, there has been steady and continuous desertification. That's total dryness or total barrenness of land as a result of increase in temperature that started in 2007. It's now called the El Nino effect. So the El Nino effect is when you have these sudden fluctuations in temperature. But the sudden fluctuation in temperature for the El Nino that we're talking about is rise in temperature. The rise in temperature lasted for some few periods of years, between 3 to 4 years, and that led to dying off of most vegetations that were still reasonably available. So in the years to come, after 2017, the herdsmen or Nigerians that were staying at the northern parts of the country started moving towards south. Towards south of my country is towards the coast, where the geographical distribution is rainforest. So in the southern part, you move towards the coast, you see more greener venture. But do remember that from the north of my country, desertification has started encroaching till as far as the middle belt of my country. And the middle belt of my country is the region where you have not the rainforest setting, but considerable grasses and much reduced trees. The desertification has now gone beyond there. It's also worsened because of the level of industrialization. People are building houses instead of planting trees. They are chopping off all the available trees within the region that is already getting devoid of vegetation. So all this has complicated issues. It has worsened the livelihood of herdsmen. These herdsmen now come down south with their cattle to meet farmers already that are complaining about absence of rainfall and increase in temperature. With a crop yield for these southern farmers, the cattle come and devoid every single grass. This now brings about conflict. When I mean conflict, thousands of people have died in the space of 2 years that I have been keeping record on deaths as a result of conflicts between herdsmen and sedentary farmers in the southern part of the country. And it's still going on till now. So when you say, how has climate change affected my country? It has affected the agricultural lifeline of the country. It has affected the socio-economical lifeline. Already things are bad before this has gotten worse. So, but the climate change is just exacerbating that phenomenon. It has worsened security challenges. It has led to countless deaths. Floodings are unprecedented. When I mean unprecedented, unprecedented. And because we don't have better satellite-based technology that can monitor, flooding system, cycles of things, it has gotten worse. So that for me is how bad climate change has gotten, with a nation already developing, or with a nation already not getting its footing on where the problems and where the issues are.
So basically, what's happened is you have the agricultural problems and the headsmen being forced to move south and increased deforestation, and it just becomes this vicious cycle as you're forced to import more food, which increases the carbon footprint and weakens local farming, and it turns into this cycle of just everything gets worse and worse.
Exactly. You summed it up. That climate change is only making the issues already that we have that have not been resolved because of the way our government is broken, or because of the current way we practice democracy across the region, not just in Nigeria. It's across the region. That has been the major thing. But just to conclude, in speaking generally, the understanding of climate change is disturbingly poor. That's the result. And it's also poor because, like I told you, that the climate change process is a bit complex. Easy to understand, but it's a bit complex because we don't have researchers from Africa, from that locality, you understand, that are being trained, that are getting these data, that are keeping these data. And the prehistorical records of weather pattern presentation were not very clear. It's just of recent that the IPCC, in their last year's reports, that are coming out to tell the world, sadly, that for temperature rise in the continent of Africa, the entire Africa, is actually much faster than the global average. What they're saying is this: over the last 50 years, they've been assuming that the temperature rise for the continent of Africa is less than the global average. It's not. It's actually 2 times much faster. Some even say as far as 3 times more faster. That's why the African continent is the most vulnerable. This is the definition that the IPCC has said, is the most vulnerable continent, even though it is the continent that has done the least in emissions of carbon dioxide. So this is what is creating a lot of problems, and it is sad and it's unfortunate that things will only get worse unless we come together as a continent, plead for our own case, and we now start to readjust and create models that can address adaptation from the impact of climate change, or that can address mitigation from the impact of climate change, because these are the only two options that we have in moving forward before the end of the centuries, where it is predicted that we may be in for a ride.
So, you mentioned the end of the century. At the end of the century, if we don't take the proper steps to mitigate climate change, what does happen to Africa?
Oh no. Lucas, it's really going to be a sad thing. It's going to be sad because I'll give you some example. The IPCC actually have a supercomputer that generates likely scenarios if we continue business as usual, likely scenarios if we cut back, likely scenarios if we adapt and mitigate. There's a supercomputer that creates likely projections. So the projection they have now, if we continue as we are doing, as business as usual, is that there will be increase in by 4 degrees to the existing temperature we have now, you understand, on the impact of climate change. So temperature rise will worsen to 4 degrees. If temperature increases by 0.1 degree, disasters happen. All we are experiencing is temperature rise that is between 1.5 and 1.8. And that's what you are seeing all over the world, from the bushfires or the burning bush in California to the cyclone in Malawi, Mozambique, to the flooding in Italy, to the hailstone attack in Cameroon. This unprecedented and weird pattern are just happening with a temperature rise of 1.5 to 1.8. Now imagine at the end of the century, we're going to have a 4 degrees stuff. So what are you expecting? It's going to be bad. An example that we usually give is this. You do know that what happens in the North Pole has great impact in the African continent. Sadly, I don't know if the African governments appreciate what is happening there. We are told now from the reports and from the scientific data that we have gotten that the Arctic Ocean, or the Arctic ice in the North Pole, the Antarctica, the ice on land is the Antarctica, the ice on water is the Arctic, that those regions are melting faster than originally predicted, because the increase in temperature in regions vary, but in those North Pole it is worse off, and that all of a sudden it is responsible for the changing ocean currents. It is responsible for the rising of sea level that we're experiencing now. It is responsible for the droughts in some areas, because if quantum water is sucked up, there will be dryness. But if quantum water drops like rainfall, there will be flooding. So these extremes of weather patterns are what Africa as a continent now is going through. So we think that if we don't stop the business as usual, we're going to have two problems. And it's going to be in this scenario. There will be variability in the timing of weather. The African continent, all the 55 states, have a dry season and a wet season. Once that variability in that timing, when they expect the dry season to take place so that they can begin farming process, when it doesn't happen, when it should happen, agricultural production will reduce. Not only that, if the quantity of rain that is expected is equally in its excess, if the quantum of rain is much, you understand, you are going to have a more disastrous implication, because rainfall in excess or flooding can kill, can destroy livestock, can destroy property, can take lives. So the social consequences of the impact that is happening in the Arctic region is what I've just explained to you. And it is actually ongoing now because the Arctic ice is melting 6 times faster. Quantums of fresh water are added into the already ocean that is already warming up. And it's warming up because the ocean is sucking up as much heat energy that it can. It's not just the heat energy alone that comes from out of the space. It's also sucking up these poisonous gases, emitted gases like carbon dioxide that we take, making the ocean very acidic. An ocean that is acidic with rising temperature means that hurricane and cyclones will be much stronger in intensity. They'll be more frequent, as we are already experiencing in the last 20 years. So your question that what will be the impact on the African continent? Our agricultural system, including livestock in particular, will be vulnerable to any variation in rainfall. That's the truth. It will be vulnerable to any distortion or any elongation of the dry season. Elongation of the dry season in Africa is causing famine. There is famine ongoing since 2012 in Mali, in Sudan, and recently in Chad. How you can know the impact of climate change with respect to rise in temperature, which is one of the parameters we are using, is that the Lake Chad, that 27 years ago used to drown people. People cannot pass freely from one point, from the narrowest point to another without drowning 37 years ago. Now people stand on the camel and cross to the other side of Lake Chad. That's how bad the water volume have reduced, you understand, in the last 3 decades. And those are the growing concerns because the Lake Chad itself, in its full volume, provides livelihood for the people around it. And the River Nile feeds into it. Somalia, Chad, Nigeria all get some water distribution from it. So once the quantum of water reduces, as we already have a water crisis now going on for the last 20-something years, since when they inaugurated the International Water Day in 1992, if I'm not mistaken. June of 1992 was when the water day celebration started. It was started because the United Nations began to recognize that water was becoming a challenge, as a result of some other things, people's way of using it, plus climate change that we now know has made things more worse. So agricultural lifeline will go. There will be more increase in disease vector system. Already you know that Africa is bedeviled with a lot of challenges on the health sector. Imagine climate change fueling these the carriers of this disease like mosquito. So areas in Africa that normally do not see mosquito will now begin to see mosquito, because mosquito will have to move away because they also need to survive. So mosquito will move away from regions like in West Africa, where they are predominantly, to areas like northeastern part of the country, northeastern part of the continent, where mosquitoes do not reside, because the weather in West Africa, from the simulation of the IPCC, will be much worse. Another important thing that I want people to also know that is happening that in the continent as a result of climate change is transhuman migration. Even within countries, even within my country, like I gave you the scenario, people are already moving away from regions that are becoming very harsh and unlivable. They are moving to the cities now. So there's a very strong push from rural components of any nation to the cities. That will only make things more worse. That will only increase the carbon footprint in the cities. Already that cities and their leaders are struggling to contain. Sanitation will be poor. Health-wise, there will be exacerbation. There will be so much stress on the health system because of the quantum of people they need to adjust to. All these are part of what climate change is doing, because climate change is worsening the human system that they've always depended on for their livelihood. Rural Nigeria have seen over 57% decrease in agricultural productivity.
That bad already?
Yes, and it's as bad as people cannot even buy a cup of rice. By a cup of rice, I mean your normal tumbler. They can't buy a cup of rice filled with it. Buying foodstuffs are very expensive. It's as expensive of spending $360 on buying a bag of rice. So these are some of the areas when you ask that how will Africa be impacted? Africa will be impacted because the human system Africans depend solely on, which is agriculture, trading. You understand? There are farms, those that are fishermen amongst them. All those existing natural resources are already undergoing uh, diminishing, diminishing effects, and this diminishing effects is further worsened by the ongoing health issues that we have. Another thing I also want to tell people, especially those in this part of the climb that are, we call the advanced nation, the Western world, is that health issues will continue to get worse. The last 100 years, we are seeing that the emerging infectious diseases that we are currently seeing as a result of animals. Animals are the ones transmitting the current infectious disease that we're exposed to. One of the current infectious disease that I know of that have animals as being the driver is Ebola. You do know that Ebola stays in animals that like bats, bush meats, and things like that. Because of the difficulty to get food, human beings are moving into the forest where these bats always stay in their enclave. Now that contact between bats and humans who are sourcing for food, you understand, who are chopping off all the trees, are making these animals homeless. And these animals have no choice than to migrate to where humans live. Now they carry along with them these diseases. And because a hungry man needs to feed, if he sees a moving creature less than it, even bigger than it, if it's an elephant, they want to eat it. So in eating a bat or eating a bush or a forest meat or a forest game that inhabits the virus Ebola, you automatically have it. Now it doesn't now stop there. Because you now have it, you now become the host and you now spread it to other humans. And that's how zoonotic diseases that are of infectious nature have begun to rise in the last 20 years. And all these have been linked to the melting of the Arctic region, or the melting going on in the Arctic region, because we know from scientific data that thousands of years ago, viruses were trapped as, the ice were building up and were forming mountains.
In the
So these
permafrost,
ice
right?
blocks have trapped viruses. But the last 20 years, they have been melting. So these viruses have started exposing. Again, we know that birds migrate because of season to season. Now, when they move into those regions during their part of migration, they pick along with them these viruses that already have been issued, had been trapped 1,000 years, but the impact of climate change or the impact of the rise in temperature is melting them. Birds now bring them as hosts again and fly down to our regions like in Africa. You understand? Like in Malawi, we know that transhuman birds, Malawi, Congo, we know that transhuman birds fly from the Arctic region and return back when the season is favorable for them. So this vulnerability that climate change is exposing the entire African continent to is only going to get worse. And health systems in and outside of Africa are the ones that will face new challenges. Sadly, Western world seem a bit prepared for health challenges because of the advancement. But unfortunately for Africans, we are not fully ready for it. So these are some of and many other things I will also discuss as we move forward in the discussion.
Right. So that does kind of bring me to the thing I want to get to next, which is a bit you're the CEO of Team 54, right? And
Yeah.
so it's not a particularly well-known group in the United States and Europe, I don't think. So why don't you tell people a bit of what you guys do and how you started, and
Oh,
give us an
thank you so
introduction.
much. So, with all the knowledge I told you about the climate change, the rising temperature that is influencing the way people will live, threatening their livelihood, creating security challenges, the pressure that climate change is causing with transhuman migration, the diminishing agricultural opportunities, my heart became very heavy in 2016 while I was in Nigeria. I was worried about what was going on across the world. I was also from a part of the country where we also actively explore oil, fossil fuel. You do know that the Niger Delta region accounts for some considerable percentage of oils that are being sold across the world. And I've seen the impact firsthand of how these oil drillings, how these fossil fuel investments, you understand, have caused. It has caused pollution of water. Grasses in some regions in the Niger Delta, the Ogoni regions, the grasses are black because the crude oil has spilled on top of the surface of the topsoil. And it's the topsoil people plant in. The topsoil is where you plant and you harvest your crops. The water tastes bad, and sometimes when it is like night, it's still day because they flare methane, as in flare methane. And when it rains, everybody runs away because if the water touches your skin, it's acidic rain, it's hydrogen sulfide rain, it's carbonated rain. It's going to peel you off. So I've gone through all those stuff. So I had a moment to rethink and reflect that something needs to be done or somebody needs to speak up. So I got involved with an organization in the US while in Nigeria, the Climate Reality Project. The Climate Reality Project is run by the former Vice President of America, Mr. Al Gore.
Ah, yes.
And I was fortunate enough to, be selected for a training in Colorado. And when we were done with the extensive training that lasted for 3 days, but I was there for like a week, I now had this renewed interest and desire to set up the Team 54 project. So the Team 54 project is a non-profit organization now registered in the United States. We are 2 years old now. That raises awareness about the impact of climate change in vulnerable nations and communities. My emphasis is in vulnerable nations and communities. And these vulnerable nations and communities that our major projects and major drives are geared to are Africa as a whole, the Pacific region, Asia, and Southern America, and some communities in America. Communities like communities in rural Oklahoma, like Geronimo, communities like the community in Michigan, the Flints. So communities in California, especially those in the northern part of California that are heavily impacted by climate change. So Team 54 project raises the awareness, but we don't stop at that. We also drive the change. And we drive the change using a concept that almost everybody knows but have not taken part in it, that you cannot leave anybody behind. You cannot alienate anybody. We have what we call an all-inclusive concept. By all-inclusive concept, we mean if you join our movement, our growing movement, that is now in 169 nations. We have members from 169 nations. Cuba, we had 3 people join us from Cuba 2 months ago. So we are now 170. Plus, we have nations that are not originally recognized by the United Nations structure, but exist as a sovereign entity, like Tokelau in the Pacific region, like Cook Island, like Narau. These are island nations that do not have status in standing, at the United Nations, but exist as a sovereign nation and are greatly impacted in climate change.
Wait, I got a quick question. I thought Cook Island was part of New Zealand.
Yes, it's part of New Zealand, but you do know that there's a general understanding that some entities of New Zealand have autonomy and have their own governance. It's just like Monaco. There are principalities. There are countries within the country. You understand? So Tokelau is annexed to New Zealand. New Zealand is like the big brother, but New Zealand have little or no say in what happens. However, New Zealand being the big brother gives immigration pass, visa-less status to any person coming from any of those territories. So they are called territories, but being a territory means that there's a limit to what you can gain and there's a limit of rights you can demand in the real New Zealand. The same thing with Puerto Rico. You understand? It is an American annexed territory, but you do know that there are limitations to what Puerto Ricans can do. Yes. You understand? America has a general overview around it, but they are not recognized as a nation. However, they can take part in other things or have status that are not nationhood. So it's the same thing happening for all those regions. And this is what I want to educate people about. They are the ones that are disproportionately affected. I have members in Kiribati that are telling us that by 2030, they may not have a nation again. Again, climate change will, as we move forward, define what a nation will be. A nation may not be necessarily where you come from, because where you come from may not exist because water would have taken over the whole land and then your entire landmass will have disappeared. So this is the reason why we need to take things very serious. A phenomenon that is already threatening nationhood is not a phenomenon we should play with. A phenomenon that is taking lives is not a phenomenon we should. That's why Team 54 Project developed an all-inclusive concept. What it means is this: if you can sing and you have passion for poetry, you can dance, you can do that for climate change. You can sing for climate change, because we know that over 1.2 billion people love music. We know that music resonates across the world. We equally know that the solution to getting and addressing climate change is to get people en masse to do simple basic things like switching off your lights, disconnecting your laptop when you don't need them, ensuring as much as possible you don't use your laundry machine. You can go outside and dry. You don't necessarily have to drive to go and pick up grocery. You could walk. You could take bicycles. You know, these simple things, if they are done by 1.2 billion people, because the United Nations have informed us that the total number of young people between the age of 0 to 45 are 60%. In Africa, the population of youths are 68% of the entire demographic. So it means that Africa is already sitting on a time bomb, because it's their young people that are disproportionately going to be affected by 2050. It is the old people that are running the nations and determining how they act and how they don't act. And these are the things that I will also raise in the discussion, that for us to have an action that will be geared towards elevating the current status of vulnerable community, we have to take into consideration 4 things that my organization have researched on, and I'll discuss. But to address your question, head on, Team 54 Project inspires people. Sportsmen work for us. There's a sports lady, her name is Kireti. She plays badminton. Before she begins to register for the registration, she meets people at the lounge and she does a short presentation on how climate change impacts her. And then she continued for some 2-3 years until she won a medal. And they gave her the microphone to talk. And she used that opportunity to talk about climate change, talk about Team 54 Project, and how she has been an ambassador. We have members that wrote a poem. We have an official poem for our organization. It's called Apologies to Mother Nature. I'll send them to you. It's a wonderful poem written by a Gambian, a lady called Jalo. She's based in West Africa in Gambia. And that poem alone triggered the government of Gambia to invite her to recite that poem on International Women's Day 2 years ago. It got her a job, just writing a poem. She's currently studying, or she had graduated now from computer science, but that didn't give her a job. What gave her a job is her poetic mindset on climate change. After we had given her some materials, and after she had seen firsthand how drought is ravaging the northern part of Gambia, how floodings are worsening their capital cities. So Team 54 project is that mini movement that is gathering people, ordinary citizens, not celebrities, ordinary citizens that are very concerned that something is not right with the environment. Things are getting harder for us in Africa and vulnerable nations. And there needs to be a way we can address the issue. And if there are already existing solutions from what United Nations have told us, that we must either adapt or mitigate, why not we work towards it? So these are the reasons why I, in 2016, set up the Team 54 project with coordinators in every country, including the United States here. We also have local coordinators, that every state in the United States has a member. Every state across the world where our members exist, we have one person or two people working for us. For now, Philippines seems to be the biggest. A large number are in the Philippines, are in Nigeria, and are in the United States of America. We are over 208,000 members with supporters together. And not all our members are in social media, because having social media is also a privilege. You have to pay for data subscription. They are very poor. They live in less than $1 a day. You don't expect them paying $10 to $20 for an access to database. So if we need to move forward, I believe that we need to move together. We need to gather people of every area. Team 54 is also developing apps. We're currently working with Africans, Asians, and America to design app systems that can help in early warning signals for vulnerable communities, that can help farmers know that it's going to rain, and the volume of rain will be 200% more than you've expected. It will cause flooding and destroy your crops. So start your early planting on time before the eventual rain. So because the truth of the matter is that when people have heads up on what lies ahead, the preparation level and the level of vulnerability is not so max. But once you don't see anything coming, it becomes devastating. An example is what happened in the cyclone Ida or Ayada. Cyclone Ayada ravaged through the country of Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. This cyclone already had been spotted 2 weeks. It has been spotted 2 weeks by the satellite-based technology system run by the United States and the EU. And they also have warned the government in question. But because the government in question do not have the graph, they feel, no, these things have happened 10 years ago, a decade ago. It's not that serious. And because they don't have an understanding that the disaster risk management is also part of the protocol in adaptation. Because adaptation means that there's little or nothing you can do pending the time we get a solution. But we need to know how to change status quo. We need to know how to manage the situation. We need to know what to do to get out of harm's way. That's what adaptation means. So I'll give you an example. Somewhere in my country, people usually have livestock. They feed on livestock. They rear livestock as livelihood. And the impact of climate change greatly affected a friend of mine, family friend of mine, in the southeastern part of Nigeria. They had these livestock, birds, chickens, over 1,000. And sometime in 2015, it rained for 10 hours, unprecedented rain. There were reports that it's going to rain, but there was no detail on what it's going to. So they took it like the normal rain. And the rain fell for 10 hours, and it was over an ankle, over the knee in some regions, over the ankle in some regions. The entire birds that he had, mainly hens, the entire birds drowned. And he had taken a loan to get those, to rear those animals to the stage where they were. It was not yet ready for them to be sold in the bigger market. He almost killed himself. It was a disaster. People living around had to travel 1 hour to other communities to buy livestock, meaning that it became more expensive, for them. So I got to hear about the story and I got involved with him. And I told him that this is climate change, just like I told you, that all these livestock and all the systems we depend on will greatly be impacted. Productivity will reduce. However, there are two solutions. It's either we adapt or mitigate. But for mitigation, Africa somehow does not have the capacity, the financial muscle for it now. So adaptation is what we should start doing while we now plead our case with advanced nations to transfer technological system on mitigation for us. So I advise that why not he raise ducks. Duck, quack, quack, duck.
Yeah.
And then he paused and looked at me. I said, everything you're saying is making sense. But duck is not something in our culture. I told him, this is now where climate change is. Climate change will impact on your culture. That's why you need to adapt. Whatever you used to hold as law or as dogmas or as doctrines may need to change. If you need to survive, you are already in debt by millions of your currency, and your debtors will come after you, whether you like it or not. You have kids you need to take to school. You need to recoup as fast as possible. And he took the advice and he read dogs. Initially, people felt sad about dogs, but there's one thing our viewers, I want to tell our viewers, that dogs cannot drown. There has never been an episode that dogs drown, because there is a projection that this happened in 2015. There is a projection that by 2018, this rain intensity will worsen. It's now actually 200 times more than how it was then. Now the entire community feeds on ducks. Ducks are now the level of where they get protein. Rains are more worse now, but none of his ducks are dead. He's still able to recoup and sell and survive. So these are some of the adaptation strategy. This is for Africa that we need to take. So there are, for us to take a solution, for any African country to take a solution, or for any nation at all to take a solution, there are 4 things I think they need to look at. One, that in the discussion of climate change, you have to look at multiple systems. Very important. You have to look at even the geography of the place. You have to look at the season. You cannot use one solution to address it all, because in one country, you could have rainfall, summer, spring happening almost at the same time. And each of these scenarios have different outcomes, different adaptation strategy, different mitigation strategy. That's one. So, but let me use the African continent in context. Now, some of the African nations that we have now will be drier, because I told you that we have dry season and wet season. Some will be wetter. So some have the dry season, some have the wet season. So climate change will make areas that are wet more worse, areas that are dry more extremely dry. Of note is the effect again on agriculture. In Burundi and in Burkina Faso, 80% of livelihood in that nation is agriculture. 80%. Or it's agriculture related. 80%. Climate change affecting that country will be different compared to a nation like Angola, South Africa, and Mauritius, where the agricultural contribution with respect to GDPs are just about 10%. So the way Burundi and Burkina Faso must address the issue of climate change must be with more severity and more seriousness compared to other nations, and they are all still in the same African continent. So it's important we take that in perspective when we want to, take action. Another thing that we need to take in perspective is that we need to agree now that some developing nations, some vulnerable nations are powerless in addressing the issue of climate change, and that just adapting alone is not the solution, because they also want to develop. And in trying to develop, you need energy. And using fossil fuel energy is also part of the contributory reason where we are. So, but we know now that there are renewables, wind power, geothermal, solar, that are abundant in the entire African space. They are abundant in the entire African space. But the Africans do not have that capacity to muscle that. So advanced nations need to find ways. I call it the transformational, the technological transformational help, to help African nations to come off it. Because if you don't, more Africans will be leaving their country. They'll go through the desert of Libya. They'll go through the Mediterranean Ocean. They'll land in Europe and worsen already your existing system. It is what is happening in South America. The crisis there too is as a result of people not internalizing, people not realizing where their problems are. Venezuela, that used to depend heavily on fossil fuel, are now beginning to see that the market value and the investment opportunity in fossil fuel has failed. The years of corruption, the years of not investing properly, the years of not divesting into other systems have got up with them, and then there's a humanitarian crisis. People have to move in search of livelihood and in search of survival food, and that's why you now have the crisis. So that's a very important thing. Then finally, a very important factor that we must take note on before actions can be taken is that the history of post-colonial Africa, has also had an impact on Africa as a continent. I'm using Africa. So our colonial masters have somehow distorted people's mentality to see, to adapt to very difficult conditions. There are some people, if you bring them from America or from Europe and you put them in Sudan or Chad, they won't survive for 1 hour. But yet we have people in Sudan and Chad. There's no water, no lights, no telephone for years that are still existing. Yes, many of them are malnourished. Many of them are harboring a lot of disease entities. Many of them are going through a lot of, but they are able to adapt. So the post-colonial African mentality has forced us, to adapt to difficult situations. But Africans cannot continue, in that harsh, difficult scenario for a long time. After some time, you will break, and the consequence of you breaking as a result of climate change is quantum death, just like you saw in Cyclone Ida. How many adaptations would you do when a cyclone lands and splits your streets, splits your region into two, and drops in water that made an entire 15,000 people climb the roof of schools and buildings to survive? How are you going to face that? So, what I believe now that we should factor is that as this climatic condition continues and we have a mindset to always adapt to hard things, that mindset or that suffering or the pathway to adaptation, can be much easier, can be paved more easier if governments come together, especially the African government come together with Western world to cooperate together.
Okay. So when it comes to this cooperation that is, as you've pointed out, so essential, there are obviously quite a number of barriers for this, like climate denialism, which is strong in the U.S. and in Europe, especially in the U.S. And then also the moneyed interests that stand against this stuff. So, how do you propose you work with these problems? Because there's a lot of people who really don't want these problems addressed. And they're in pretty powerful places.
You're absolutely right. And you've asked a very important question that sometimes is difficult to explain. But how Team 54 is addressing the issue of climate denials are to come before them with a moral picture. So we are using the platform or the strategy of presenting climate change as a moral issue. Why do I say it's a moral issue? Would you be happy to see a 2 years old or a 3 years old friend of your own kid drink water that is poisoned with carbon dioxide?
No.
Or drink water that has oil in it? No. Would you love to switch on your TV on Fox News or CNN and you see African people or human beings like you understand, standing on top of the roof with water level higher than their current height, standing and clinging to their babies because water has ravaged the entire place? You wouldn't want to. Would you want to hear stories on CNN of a woman during the cyclone Ida pass holding her 6-month-old baby in her hand, but the water power, the currents, was so much that it swept the 6-month-old baby that has never swum in her life? The mother in question has never swum before, but in a bid to rescue the baby, the currents pushed her away. She leaves behind 4 kids who are not teenagers, 4 children, to in a world where they know nobody's coming to their rescue. Their father is dead. So these are scenarios that are there. Then the question we put to the deniers are that the times have actually changed, and that everybody knows that the only constant thing in human existence is that we need to change, and we need to change for the better. So if the weather patterns that you are seeing here are totally different from the weather patterns we've seen, and there are evidence. If you look outside, if you look inside, what you hear, what you see, California burning, there are evidence that a cigarette stick did not burn the entire field, did not burn a landmass the size of New York last year in California, because that's the equivalent of the amount of fire and the amount of land mass that the fire covered. It was the size of New York. So the size of New York was what the wildfire that happened and ravaged California covered with deaths. So if there are all these changes going on, why shouldn't we as humans be able to rise up and say, let us solve them? Because this is not the first time that we've had calamities. We've had the bubonic plague, the plague that ravaged and killed an entire population in Europe, carried by rats. We've had economical meltdowns that took place between 1999 to 2008 that led to depression, economies collapsed, people were poor, people committed suicide. But we got over it. America has bounced back from the recession. We've had health challenges like Ebola that threatened us. We all came together and we contained the spread. We put in measures to ensure that anybody coming is at least being examined to ensure that the temperatures are not rising. We are containing the disease. So if we're able to contain global problems and issues like that, why shouldn't we be able to rise up to contain the issue of climate change? Another reason that I believe our climate deniers are going through is that, like I said, the process around climate change is very complex. So the only way you can reach human beings' hearts is to personalize the story. Once they see a story personalized, it hits them more than when we push out a message that has a partisan view. And like I said, and people should know that we're having a crisis now because climate change is not only the driver of the changes we are seeing in the world. There are other also problems that are subtle that are making it worse. The rising population, because there is so much people now demanding for a very little scarce thing that is being impacted by climate change. The absence of technological transfers, because once you design a tech, you want to maximize your money and you want to maximize gain. Because of that, you don't want to easily transfer to regions that do not have until you've made enough money. So, but climate change is now telling us that we now need to be humans. Being human is you identifying the problem, you relating with the problem, and relating with people affected with the problem, rising with them and responding to it. So climate change is exposing the fact that humans are no longer humans. Humans have evolved to become monsters of themselves. Humans have become more violent over the years. humans are now becoming more selfish. And all this, whether you like it or not, directly or indirectly, is affected with resources. They are all power grabs for resources. I'll give you an example how the Darfur War, I know you've heard of Darfur. Darfur
Yes.
is in the African region. How the war actually started. And that was the first time in the history of the United Nations where they recognized that climate change caused the war or caused the conflicts. And that in moving forward, it will get worse. There will be more conflicts, not only in Africa, even outside, as a result of climate change. So in 2007, Darfur was going through what we call a drought season, their usual drought season that cuts off. But that very year, it didn't just cut off. Now, beforehand, there used to be customary laws in the Darfur region. Darfur region is in Sudan. So there used to be customary laws that protect environmental bodies like water, the pool of waters that are around, and grasses, areas where people can graze. The traditional Darfur residents always had these rules. So when people are going to the stream or the river to drink water, cows cannot move then. Cows have limited places they can graze. But as governance came and headmen within those nations started migrating towards regions where you can see water, you can see a bit of grass, the government of the day, being run by an headsman clanship-like system, abolished the traditional laws of the Darfur residents that people can graze openly, our cows need to be fed, people just need to open up the space, cows can go and take water anytime they like, they can move around, throw around their dungs that have methane that also further worsen the environment. So that created a conflict between residents of Darfur and the government of the day. That conflict led to the war that has been going on, that led to the division of Sudan into Southern Sudan and Sudan. Now, the war has taken lives also. So what happened is that climate change made the regions of Darfur unlivable. When the regions become unlivable, livelihoods, that's cattle rearing, cattle herding, becomes difficult. When livelihoods are threatened, people pick up vices that they know. The vice they can pick is they could start stealing, armed robbery, stealing people's cows, robbing people, kidnapping people, and sometimes, in the extreme of cases, joining extremisms. Because extremisms, from my own point of view, is as a result of hopelessness. People do not know where else to turn. Governments have failed to protect and guarantee fairness and justice. And then people just look at where else do they go. The only option they have are the evil people. And people are automatically pushed in there to survive. So climate change made Africa, especially the Darfur region, a battle zone. And our fear is that it will make more conflicts in future if we don't adapt, if we don't mitigate. I also want to also explain something very important that we do in Team 54 project. We also work hand in hand with international organizations to address the issue because we have a wider network across the continent. We go to meet bigger environmental non-profit organizations like Parvati.org, PARVATI.org. It's an organization that raises awareness about what is going on in the Arctic region, the experimentation for drilling of oil that is causing a lot of environmental problems, the threats to aquatic resources that are there, the indiscriminate fishing done by big boats from corporate entities, because Arctic looks very far away. People don't know that a lot of unregulated activities are going on there that are also affecting us homeland. So we work with those organizations. We are also working with an organization called Let's Do It World. They manage solid and liquid waste. we do know that pollutions from plastics and pollutions from other plastic-like materials also create emissions. The decomposing nature of some of all these plastics and the processing time or the processing energy that goes into generating plastic also generates emission. Hence, the need for us to gradually start moving away from plastic production to more better alternatives and better options like bamboo, which is now becoming an alternative because bamboo can sequestrate carbon dioxide, can suck up carbon dioxide, can also release oxygen, which is needed generally for human breathing, human living, and things like that. So we work with Let's Do It World, and we focus our attention in the Pacific region where this climate change impact are there. We focus our attention in the African continent. We help them once every year. We do a World Cleanup Day. September 21, 2019 will be the World Cleanup Day, and 10 a.m. for every time zone will be a time that people from all these continents, including our members, will join the Let's Do It World organization to pick up plastics, to sort out plastics, to pull plastic to a point, and to easily dispose of it, you understand? And we're doing that in partnership with some governments and things like that. So,
do you want to give us the date for that? The day you're doing that?
Yes, it's 21st of September 2019. It's the World Cleanup Day. It's a recognized day.
All right.
Organized by Let's Do It World Foundation to get everybody to take little simple actions in cleaning up. And Team 54 Project is part of that organization. Another thing we are doing too is that we are also working hand in hand with some organization to draw up a treaty. There is a treaty already in place that one of our partnering organizations have done. It's called MAPS. So the MAPS Treaty is the Marine Arctic Peace Sanctuary Treaty. This treaty tries to create an area in the Arctic Ocean region that is devoid of any form of exploitation, like an international park, where you don't need to go to park and do all manners of things. Those are no-go area. So MAPS is the name of that treaty. And we have sent poverty.org, the organization that is doing this treaty, has sent it to every heads of states. So we are pleading with our members here in the United States and our members across the world to reach out to each of your country and tell them that what happens in the Arctic region affects us. Because the Arctic region is like the air conditioner for Earth. You understand? So once it starts to have problems, what it means is that you will not have any cooling effect again. Then you now start to have rise in temperature. And the rise in temperature will melt the ice. And melting ice means that viruses that have been trapped over some time will be released. Now we're going to be having new infectious disease, compounding what already we have as a health indices. We're going to have rising sea level water, causing erosion, causing washing away of land, even causing floodings. We're going to have worsening of all this stuff. So we are pleading with our members to go to the MAPS Treaty website. Again, it's parvati.org, parvati.org, the website. Sign the petition. It takes about a minute or two to sign the petition, already prepared. Go through it, read it, sign the petition, reach out to your government for them to sign to ensure that Arctic, whatever we are doing in the Arctic region, stops, so that we can reduce the impact on the ocean currents. Reducing the impact of the ocean current from a melting ice will reduce sea level rise, will reduce the likelihood of infectious disease emanating from that region, will enhance our agricultural capacity, because water will be readily available as a result, and the fluctuation in water patterns will reduce. So Team 54 Project is an organization that shares its view with any other organization that wants to ensure that we make the earth green again. We create opportunities and concepts and ideas for people. And then more importantly, we tell people that even when we work united, the people that govern you have sweeping impact on the kinds of investments or the kinds of things and the kinds of laws they put in place that can adversely affect your environment. So the ongoing global governance evolution, where people are internalizing, people are no longer trying to encourage global outreach, people are no longer trying to be compassionate on others, need to be reviewed clearly. And I will not also end this discussion without also stating that population is also something we need to sit down, and work with. There are those schools of thought. There are actually schools of thought that says that the problem is not population, that the problem is we not being able to manage the resources that we have.
I would agree with that one.
So, but that there are some people that are saying that population has a multiplying effect. If the number of grasses that can feed 1,000 people is not enough to feed 1,000 people this year, that could feed 1,000 people 20 years ago, cannot feed the same 1,000 people now in 2019. How do you think that it will be able to feed the same number of people in 2020? What I mean is this: we have a growing population now that is 7 billion. Over 150 years ago, we were under a billion. So under a billion then was how we were able to drive industrialization, how we were able to increase wealth and affluence. People started having affluence, people started having kids, people can afford to buy things of luxury. This increase in consumption of luxurious things also added to production levels that worsen the environmental events. They are all interlinked. And the growing population is going to make it hard for people to get things readily, because demand and price, demand for things can influence the pricing of those things. So some poor people will not even get meals, because wealthy people would have bought up all the meals to sell, at a exorbitant price, and then worsening the already poverty index, and then making life very unbearable. So it's important in moving forward that if we are to help, we have to look at how best we can work around the issue of population. There needs to be a discussion on the issue of population, and I don't think it's something that is big. We can also use the population we have now to solve our problem. If 3.5 billion of the 7.5 billion of people do individual things like eat moderately. In Team 54 project, we're not pushing that people should abolish meat, because you have to look at the perspective of an African. The African diet believes in meat. Africans even use meat for other things outside of food. Africans sacrifice with meat. I hope you know that. There are cultures that use meat for their sacrifices. So apart from just eating alone, Africans generally reverence their meat. But again, Africans need to realize that times have changed. And because times have changed, like I said, people need to change. Your failure to change will lead to your extinction. Do remember that dinosaurs were the largest monsters at some point over 10,000 years ago. The reason why a big monster like that, much larger than us, by mass, by height, by everything, refused to exist again was they refused to adapt. When mankind was adapting, moving from stone-based technology to discovering of fire, to hiding under caves, to moving away from regions that were becoming uninhabitable, dinosaurs were flexing their muscles. They were not adapting until calamity came upon them. Changing weather patterns, volcano eruptions, you understand, took them all out. Man had already moved out from harm's way, you understand, and had evolved in the process till where man has gotten to. So man's ability to adapt is never in question. Hence the reason why we tell the climate denial that men have always adapted, that mankind have gone through unbearable things. For other animals, they die off. But man is so smart to always look for areas where you can adjust or create technology that can create that convenience for them. So addressing climate change will not be a big thing in moving forward.
All right. Thank you, Daniel, for coming on. It was a pleasure. I'll put links to your organization's website and some of the other things you've mentioned in the comments section. And thanks for talking to
Yes,
Earthstrike.
and just for the records, because I didn't mention it, our website is team54project is one word .org. Team54project.org. You can go there. We are also on Facebook, and we have over 100 platforms on Facebook. But we have one platform, Team 54 International. That's the main group. That's the global platform. Then we have country platforms, because some countries have peculiar issues that that really affects them. But just to round up our discussion, is something that I will want to say, that climate change is a battle that we all can win. And if we all come together and begin to realize that we are humans, begin to realize that every one of us bleeds, begin to be more compassionate, begin to identify these little problems and see how we can, you know, get to a compromise, that we will be able to address the issue. So it is the little things that we do to address the climate change done over a long period of time that becomes a culture that now drives the change. So the 7.2 billion people we have on Earth, we need to find a way. We need to personally now start taking actions on your own personally. Switch off lights. Be very moderate. The language is be moderate. Don't eat. Don't get food that you are not going to finish. Don't buy groceries that you know fully well you need to throw away after some time, because even food waste, food disposal are also have been linked to the emissions that are being caused. Then apart from all these personal things we need to do, government themselves also need to start improving infrastructures and using infrastructures and driving them towards the green economy. So they should encourage opportunities to acquire electric cars. They should make renewable energy solar panels more cheap and readily available. Africans are in need of an energy platform that can drive the development that they want. Since we agree that fossil fuel is not doable in the long run, we must be able to provide an alternative for them. And solar seems to be the alternative that we have now. And then more importantly, we need to educate people. People need to be educated on what climate change is. We do not need to push people away. We do not need to attack deniers. We do not need to create a political spectacle on what climate disruption or global warming or climate change is. What we need to do is that we need to rise up together in unison and address the issue, because the issue, if not addressed, will worsen socio-economical status and then create a scenario where people will be leaving their country and will be coming to America, not in millions but in billions, to forestall inter and interstate, global conflicts. We need to work together in cooperation. You understand? Seek out areas of mutual interest, and then ensure that things get better. We also need to research. We also need to encourage Africans, to research more. We need to also release grants for them. They are the ones on ground, so that they can monitor how this the science of climate change are going on, and then compare with others. We also need to invest in the sectors that are very critical for Africans, like the agricultural sector. We need to invest in. We also need to invest in water management technique, because I know that there is already an ongoing water crisis in Cape Town in South Africa. They are even rationing water there. It's that bad. Then we need to, as much as possible, also broaden our technological reach. You understand, on areas of agriculture, like bring in artificial intelligence. Bring in early warning systems to notify farmers, to notify even people that are in harm's way of ecological ecological problems or phenomenon. So generally, we just need to be humans again. That solar energy, it's one way we can get the quantum energy needed for the growth we want and replace fossil fuel. And if we continue to, delay on how we transit, because it should be a gradual process. If we delay on the way we transit to more cleaner forms of energy, we only will be worsening people's lifestyle. So I want to thank Earthstrike for giving me this opportunity and giving my organization the opportunity to come on board and give a fresh perspective of the challenges that Africans have, and to also encourage Africans that are doing wonderfully well. There are many non-profit organizations doing wonderfully well. There are many Africans developing apps and systems. However, we need to work together with governments, and government need to rise up and hold themselves accountable. Create the legislative frameworks to hold corporate entities, responsible. Government should also create ways by which they can address climate change. Like in the Philippines, I also want to thank the Philippine government on what they are doing. Every 12 years old in Philippines, till he will die, will plant trees, one tree every year. So once you turn 12, till you will leave Earth, every year you will plant trees. So once you're 12 years old, you plant a tree. Once you're 13 years old, you plant a tree, 14 like that. Every year you exist, one tree needs to be planted. And they started this in 2012 because there was a super typhoon called Yolanda that wrecked the entire country, and over 10,000 people were dead. Till date, over 6,000 people are still missing. There's quantum destruction and everything. Team 54 project in Philippines, last week Sunday, went to a region to plant the trees in that region. So I want to thank you and thank everybody for having me.
Right. Okay. Bye.